The Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
Yes. It's one of my favorites.
Hey, Glenn.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
No, we, I had that in a whole other big roll
Okay.
that I bought for like $3.
I don't know how much.
Harbor Freight. I never used it, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Fresh from the store.
Now, I was also thinking, I don't remember how those little things work. With Velcro,
I just got one.
if you put Velcro on the thing and Velcro on those little things.
Hold on one
And I
second.
got the paper.
Oh, audio sounds great.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Well, let's just start with the tape idea.
Okay.
Because I think that was brilliant. That was still brilliant. I mean, that's so. I don't know. I think that just illustrates how sometimes a person can look at a situation from one perspective, and they kind of, I don't know if fixated is the right word on it, but they can just kind of get honed in on that, and then somebody else can look at it and go, "Hey, what about this?" And
It's like, you're trying to figure out how to make your idea work without thinking.
yeah, outside the box. Yeah.
She was supposed to find out today.
Yeah.
No cancer.
Oh,
Oh, that's
great.
great.
My mom's Anita.
Mom's
She's not. My dad is having a really rough day. I talked to him and he seemed okay, but she said he was out of it, like almost like he was hallucinating, not really recognizing. When I talked to him, he knew who I was, and because I was like, she put him on the phone, and I was like, Dad, are you okay? And he's like, no, B, I'm good. And I was like, all right. So he called me by his name for me, and I was like, okay, dude. And he's like, no problem, do that. And I was like, are you sure you're okay? Because if I need to come there and we need to go to the hospital, it's okay to go to the hospital if you need to. And he's like, no, I promise I'm good, but everybody just leave me alone. So I knew he was all right.
Well, yeah, my cousin's husband's going through chemo, and he had a terrible reaction and
Yeah.
ended up in the hospital.
Oh yeah, because they say it's very possible. That's why my mom gets nervous because he keeps getting like really like out of it. Like he's not like really aware of what's going on.
But is
So
he dehydrated?
yes, I mean no, not today, but he was last week, so he might still be recovering from it because he did let himself get pretty dehydrated. So
Who did the prayer last week? It was Glenn. All right. So either one of you want to do it? You're voluntary.
what that was.
Your time. Okay.
I'll let somebody else do it.
Do I hear water boiler?
Yeah, I looked over, I'm like, what?
Is that gonna do anything with the power?
Let's shut the coffee off.
Oh,
Sounds like it's gonna explode.
No,
okay.
it's normal. And it works as long as the coffee is off.
And this is off or on? Right. Okay.
Takes the same
All right. Well, if you're watching this, because we're streaming, okay. If we lose power,
It's all good.
it's all Jody's fault.
Yep.
He was working out.
Just brought whipped cream myself.
You get it going,
I'm gonna
Brian?
make a hot cocoa.
What?
You get it going?
Yeah, it's going. Yeah. So, did you happen to see we did a test video Sunday? All right. So, thanks to the help of Glenn, we did a short test video. I left it on there if you want to go check it out. I thought it sounded good. I was trying to figure out how to attach the microphone,
never seen that either.
and while I was telling Glenn, I had one idea, and I kept thinking, well, how can I get this to work? And Glenn had a brilliant idea. So anyway, it involved tape, and that's yes. Well, it was brilliant in that it was simple and it worked, and it was effective, and it was great. I mean, it worked great. So
Yes.
I'm thinking how I can counteract gravity and tape.
What's strong? Oh, which kind is it?
It's Ricola,
Is it the mint, the lemon mint?
liquid center, honey lemon.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because the liquid centers are such a strong.
Hi,
But they've
Laura.
got a lemon mint one that's really strong too. It's like, ooh, that's overpowering.
Heard you're a little under the weather. Don't mind me. I'm talking with Laura. I'm having my own conversation up
Hi
here.
Laura, we missed you.
What?
You said you're under the.
No, Laura Raymond's under the weather.
Say you want to talk.
No, I'm all good.
Laura, you want to talk?
All right, it's time for us to get started. Just when people are getting ready to scoop some hot cocoa. It's almost June. Anyway, yeah, whipped cream involved. Do we have the spinning wheel loaded up, ready to go? All right, who don't do that over your Bible. I don't mean to. I'm not going to watch. Anyway, all right, so we are continuing on in the book of Judges. I do want to, I'm usually the one giving the review, right? So I thought maybe tonight we'll just do a little bit of a pop quiz. So you don't have to spin the wheel for this. Can you name the judges that we've studied thus far? Deborah, okay, that's one. You.
Shamgar.
All right.
Poor Shamgar.
Poor Shamgar. And then Gideon, yep. So those were let's see, we have 4 or 5 that we've studied thus far. Well, if you think Shamgar was sad, chapter 10's got a couple of them that nothing's mentioned about them. All right, another pop quiz question. About how many years does the book of Judges cover in Israel history?
400.
All right, about 450. All right, so to go along with that, does anybody have a cross-reference in the New Testament?
Because I wrote it on one of these papers.
No. Acts.
It was Acts, but I...
1320.
Yes, there it is. I found it just
Yeah.
when you said it.
Yeah. All right, very
I
good.
boxed it because I thought, that'll be a question that comes back
I
up.
have all my other lessons, I could just go and look through.
You could. Gideon, how big of his army, or how big was his army when he went to fight the Midianites? 300, and they had thousands and thousands that he took on. So last week we were in chapter 8. Gideon and his 300 men pursue the Midianite kings. Did they ever catch the kings?
Yep.
They did. On their way to track them down, did Gideon and his men run into some resistance?
Yep.
There was a couple of cities, right?
One starts with an S.
I didn't even write their names down.
Succoth,
Okay.
and then, Penuel or something.
Okay. Yep.
Penuel.
Yeah. So Gideon and his men went to the city. They asked for some bread. They needed some nourishment because they were all exhausted from war. And the leaders of those cities said, "Oh, do you have the kings yet?" And they said, "No." And they said, "Okay, yeah." Didn't really.
Regretted their actions.
They did, because did Gideon come back and punish them? So chapter 8 teaches us some really important lessons like perseverance. Gideon continued to persevere, didn't he? Consequences for our actions. There was consequences on those 2 cities for not helping Gideon out. Accountability and justice. And then Gideon, not perfect. He made something. He probably had good intentions, but he made something that swayed
Gathered up
the
all
people,
rings and gold, and he made an ephod.
which was
Ephod.
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 Ephod with a D at the.
That only the priests were supposed to.
Yeah. So you had this religious
Golden armor.
Like a vest kind of garment.
kind of vesty type of thing. I think maybe Chuck, did you say, or somebody over here said something about 70 pounds?
And then put it on display, and they all began to worship it.
So maybe God talked to him through that ephod, but whatever the case was, the people began to worship that. So that was a form of idolatry, right? And that was bad. So, chapter 9, for the observer.
Ask one review question?
Sure.
Let's see if the young people remembered my first question from Sunday morning. What
And-
were the 3 unusual weapons that Gilead and his men had?
A pitcher, a torch, and a trumpet.
Okay.
Okay, because I was going to say, none of us were there in your class, so you couldn't spin a friend. If you're looking at your neighbor there, it was just you two. We're praying for you, Laura, to get better, completely better. All right, so chapter 9 is a long chapter. What? Chapter 9 is sad? Chapter 9 there's interesting things. So we are breaking it up into 2 parts, because if we didn't, we'd probably just be reading 57 verses tonight, not having much discussion about, and then to ask 10 questions from 57 verses, we'd be skipping a lot. So anyway, this chapter is an account of a man with some ruthless ambitions. We'll talk about his name here in a little bit. It led to some horrible crimes and acts on his part. He was a cruel leader, which inevitably ended up in a revolt starting to take place. So we will talk about all those things this evening. So we are going to be in verses 1 through 25 tonight of Judges chapter 9. And we broke this up into 3 sections. So we'll start in verses 1 through 6, and then make sure that spinny wheel is ready to go. All right, so verse number 1, then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Milo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. All right, who does question number 1 go to? And there's chuckling, so it's one of them two. I'm going to guess Rachel. Rachel gets question 1. Pretty simple question. Pretty straightforward. Who went to Shechem and spoke to his family?
I'm trying to figure out how you pronounce things.
Well,
Oh, just
just
like,
yeah.
We're
I mean,
not
just
going to judge you over how you
yeah.
pronounce it.
Abimelech, the son
Okay.
of Jerubbaal?
All right.
Very good.
Great. So Abimelech and his dad was Jerubbaal, also known as Gideon. Jerubbaal was kind of his nickname,
I was
so
gonna say
Gideon, because it's easier to pronounce. They went to Shechem. Shechem was a very prominent place in Israel's history, at least the early history. A lot of things happened at Shechem. Abraham built an altar there. Jacob had an altar there. Joseph was buried around that vicinity. There was the farewell speech by Joshua given, again, within that vicinity. So it was a very important location in Israel's history. And so he went to Shechem. He spoke to his family. The English Standard Version has something a little bit, words that a little bit different, as does the King James Version, American Standard Version, Young's literal translation. It says, to speak in their ears. You see that, Addison? Because I know you use the ESV. So Kaufman viewed this as, he's quietly whispering this conspiratorial plan to his family members. And, when you think about whispering something, why would you whisper something? Don't want anybody to hear. So let's think about that. Why would Abimelech want to keep this a secret?
Because he wouldn't want to warn his brothers.
What do you think his brothers would do?
They'll probably rise up and kill him.
Yeah, so let's keep it a secret. Let's it's a little bit of a conspiracy, right? That's going on here, and he's kind of planting some seeds, right? So who best to plant these seeds with than people that are your own relatives? So he goes to his own relatives, gets them on his side. So question number 2 goes to Catherine. What question does he ask them?
I wrote in my own words, which is better, 70 brothers ruling over you or one brother ruling over you?
All right. And where did you find that answer?
In the Bible.
Good job.
I didn't write
You didn't write that verse? All right.
verse 2.
All right, verse 2. Yep. So anybody get anything different? That's
I did put that technically because the question says, what question did he ask them? Technically, he didn't ask that question to them. Technically, he asked them to go ask the men of Shechem. So,
well, technically. Good catch. Yeah. So maybe, anyway, not that's the answer I put, and if you got that, you got it right. But yeah, technically he did go to them, and then he kind of was fishing for them to go ask that question. But it was a false insinuation, wasn't it? He was hinting at something that was false.
right. First off, Gideon had already said that he didn't want to, and he didn't want his sons to rule over them either. So now you wanting to be a ruler over somebody you weren't going to be a ruler over anyways.
And there was no evidence that any of his sons wanted to rule over them, any of the 70. No evidence of that. But for some reason, Abimelech did that. But why do you think he went to the family first?
Because it's easier to get your family on your side than just strangers, so.
Well, and he got money from them.
Well, eventually he does. So he was manipulative. So, I mean, there's a little bit of a indication of the kind of character this man is. And maybe to stir up some alarm amongst them. Why would they want, I mean, Abimelech was one of them, right? Why would they want an outsider to rule over them? And they probably worked them up.
And I think he knew that by going to his family, because if Abimelech had gone himself to the men of Shechem, then they might not have listened to him, versus when he's got these people that are backing him, now it looks like, hey, we kind of agree with him, so we should probably think about letting him be our ruler, so it's not just him on his own now.
Yeah, wasn't like it was just his idea, even though it was just his idea, but
Right.
yeah.
But in getting the money, he's allowed to hire.
Well, hey, that's question 3. So let's spin the wheel. Let's spin the wheel, and then we'll. Glenn. All right. So what did he get from the temple, and what did he do with it?
He got 70 shekels of silver, and he hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed.
All right.
That was verse 4, and I guess it's verse 4. I don't have a verse for me.
Okay. Anybody got anything different? So commentators, it's pretty interesting. You read through this and you read through, commentators' thoughts, and maybe you have your own thoughts and ideas about this man Abimelech just within the first 4 verses of this particular chapter. And commentators had nothing good to say about him. And they had nothing good to say about any of the men, or these men that they hired.
Because they're worthless and reckless. So.
Yeah, so let's see. I have down in my notes, I don't remember who, I quoted this from somebody. Anyway, they said they're idle, worthless vagabonds, the scum of society, who had nothing to lose but much to gain from the success of a revolutionary movement.
Where did you get all that from?
I don't remember I usually say who I get this from, and I think it was Kaufman, but I think he was quoting somebody else. I don't remember right off the top of my head. But
Just say.
but not a very good compliment of these. But if you want to find trouble, can you find trouble? Can anybody find trouble?
Yes, and they were,
And you look for it among people who are known for causing trouble.
So,
you throw some money around, you can get anybody to do anything.
you know, this kind of reminded me of an incident. So keep a bookmark here. Keep a bookmark here. And does anybody in here have the old King James version? Can you read for us Acts 17 verses 1 through 5 from the old King James? Acts 17, 1 through 5. This is an incident where the Jews were jealous. They go out and they hire some men to, well, cause some problems, to start a riot and a mob against Paul.
That's 17:5.
You said 1 through 5?
1 through 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul, as his manner was, went unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures, opening and alleging that Christ must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Jesus, whom I preached unto you, is Christ. And some of them believed and consorted with Paul and Silas, and some of the devout Greeks, a great multitude, and then the chief women, not a few. But the Jews who believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd followers of the baser sort, and gathered a company, and set all the cities on an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people.
I love that passage. Lewd men of a baser sort. That when I read this, I was like,
Thinking that?
yes, I was already thinking that. Anyway, we could talk about that later. It was kind of funny. That passage talking about these worthless, reckless men reminded me of the Jews being all full of envy, and they went out and bought troublemakers. They threw them a little bit of money, and lewd men of the baser sort. They were worthless. All right. Anybody else got anything on question 3?
That was awesome. I like that.
All right. Question number 4 goes to Granny. Which Granny? There's a few Grannies. Chloe's Granny? Okay. All right. Question 4. What did he do to his brothers? This is obviously the reference to the guy back in verse 1, right? Or question 1, Abimelech. And what did he become?
He killed his brothers,
Okay.
became king,
All right. Verse.
5 and 6.
All right. Does anybody have anything different?
All but Jotham.
All right. I did include that in my notes. He
Yeah,
killed
I did
all
too.
the...
But then, okay, I got a question, because it says that he killed 70 sons of Gideon.
Yeah.
How many sons of Gideon were there? Because
Wow.
I thought there were 70.
It was just...
We said last week there was 71, but this would make 72.
Right, because now you've got, so that's,
Well,
that's why I was
it's-
like,
I was telling the girls, maybe it's kind of a roundabout number, like we
Okay,
say, it's
because I
about
was like-
70.
I think the
So maybe
70
there
was
a
kind of
little
like
bit
a
more than
designation, or
Okay.
like they were known as the 70
okay,
sons
because I was
of...
like, wait, last
yeah,
week we said
yeah.
that there was
So
70
maybe
plus
there's
1, and now...
72.
So technically, he killed 69 brothers. But it does say he killed the 70 sons of Gideon, but... Because that's...
But that makes sense that you, like, it would be like a designation, because it's
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
that's something that they did a lot.
Maybe
Like,
he
that's
had
how we got
them
the...
all lined up and they thought it was all of them and they killed them all and they just assumed that they had them all, but the younger one had hid. So,
Yeah.
well, youngest, it doesn't
May-
say he's too awfully young.
Maybe.
necessarily.
So again, there's some gaps in the particulars of what's going on. So as long as you're not teaching it as gospel truth, I mean, you can let your imagination, you know,
We do estimate
think
stuff
of it.
all the time.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
constantly doing it in our Americans.
Okay, so they killed the brothers,
Mm-hmm.
except for the one, and then they made him the king.
Terebinth's tree.
Did they consult with God
No?
when they
No.
made him king? They just made him king. Now, I jotted that question. Well, I jotted that question down. Did they consult with God when they made him king? Obviously, they didn't. And can you think of one of the main reasons why they wouldn't have consulted with God when they made him king?
I knew what the answer would be.
Well, they knew what the...
They were just part of the scheme to kill these brothers, so.
Well, also, how about the fact that they didn't worship God? They worshipped Baal, the false god Baal Berith. So I didn't put it in my notes, but it's kind of interesting that they didn't even consult their false god about this. They just, at least there's no indication that they did that. They just made him king. Now, there's been some debate over Abimelech was not the first king of Israel. If you look at charts, who was the first king of Israel? Saul was. So this man, and you read other opinions on this, it was like they just put him into that place of position and they called him king. And it's like other people didn't recognize him as the official king.
He made himself king.
Yeah.
He's a king in his own mind.
Does that make you a king?
To me,
I don't know.
it
Maybe
does. You could be, if you say you
I
are
identify
something,
as
you are
a-
that person, yes. He identified as a king.
I think last week I said that in chapter 8, verse 33 was the only time that Baal Berith was mentioned in the Bible. Well, in chapter 9 as well, because it kind of combines together the accounts of what's going on here. So we have 8:33 and 9, verse 4. All right. Any other thoughts, comments?
I kind of looked at, I don't know, I looked up on one stone
Okay.
and just was thinking about what did that mean, and I kind of looked a couple places. It was like they gathered them together in like the center of the city and killed them all. They didn't go this guy's house and kill him, this guy's
Yep,
house.
they were all together.
They, in front of everyone,
Yep.
gathered them together and executed them.
I was figuring they were beheaded, they were like chained up and took one at a time and beheaded, so they were all killed on the one stone. But maybe like in the city square.
But I wonder if anybody said, hey, we missed one. Or I don't know.
Well, like
At that point, there's 70 of them, they weren't counting.
well, that's what Glenn said, they lost count.
They lost count. Didn't have enough fingers.
It was too bloody, I mean.
Too, yeah. They're like, close enough. We got all the guys that were here. All right.
And actually, I mean, the youngest, he ran off into hiding,
Yeah.
so.
And you mentioned the terebinth tree. I didn't write anything in my notes about the terebinth tree. Do you have anything extra about
Well,
that?
we had just talked about that before.
That was
that
the
was the
lordly
really
tree,
strong
right?
one,
The really
the-
big godly like tree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that, the guy with all the hair got stuck in.
A lot of things happen by terrorists too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it also mentions that it's like, it said something about it being like this city.
So it's probably right there in the middle with that
what does it
stone.
say?
Yeah.
Kind of like the city square pillar.
Are you thinking of the
Found
tower?
King by the terebinth tree at the pillar.
Pillar.
That was in
Okay.
Shechem.
All right, very good. All right, so we're going to move on, verse 7, and we'll go down through verse 21. Now, when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out, and he said to them, "Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Should I cease giving my oil with which they honor God and men and go to sway over trees?' Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go to sway over trees?' Then the trees said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.'" Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbabel and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbabel and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech his brother. All right, so now we're moving on to question number 5, and that goes to Addison. Who cried out?
Jotham, the only brother not killed.
All right, so Jotham cried out. This was obviously some time had passed after Abimelech had been made the king. He cries out. Where did he go to cry out?
Stood on top of the mountain, Gerizim.
All right, so he wouldn't be at like a tippy top of a giant mountain, but he was on a mount of Mount Gerizim, and more than likely this was a place that was a little bit higher up from Shechem. And why would he be up there? It's close by. It wasn't like 2,000 miles away. Well, but he's up there and he's speaking from this mountain.
Because the voice will carry.
So his voice would carry down to the men at the bottom of the mount. A lot of people say this mount area, there's probably festivals and whatnot that took place up high above the city. But he's standing above them, and then he's shouting down at them. And question number 6 goes to who? Chloe. All right. So he's shouting down to them a little bit of a story, right? We're going to talk about this very briefly here in just a minute. But the question is, what kind of trees are mentioned in this particular section, verses 8 through 15?
The olive tree and the fig tree.
Okay. Those are good. Was there one other type of tree? The vine, but that's a vine. So not to throw you off, but that's a vine. I don't think vines technically are trees, but that's part of nature. So if you put that, that's good. But there was another one. Cedar trees. All right, excellent. But what's a bramble? Bramble's not necessarily a tree. It would be like a thistle. And it would be worthless, and it would be a plant that's just worth the burn pile. You pick it and throw it away. Who was the bramble?
Abimelech.
Ultimately, that's what he was saying. Abimelech was the bramble. He was a prickly kind of guy. Also, if you called somebody a bramble or a thistle, it's an insult because you're saying he's worthless. So if anybody, just a footnote, if you're watching this online, and Laura, if anybody ever calls you a bramble, it's not a compliment, okay? Just don't, hey, you calling me something? No, not.
Not be called vine either.
Mr. Bramble?
Call me Mr. Bramble.
So if you use a translation such as the New King James Version, the New King James uses the headers, and this heads this as a parable. It says it's the parable of the trees. Kaufman and another commentator like Barnes, they mention that this was actually a fable.
That's what it sounded like to me.
Yeah, so, and well, we know a parable is it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, right? So it is a story, but would there be a difference between a parable and a fable?
With an earthly meaning.
Well, but, so I guess a fable could be a parable, but not all parables were fables. Not to confuse us. Because what's a fable?
It's a fictitious
It's a-
story
it's-
with a
With, like, the
learned
trees
message at
talking.
the end.
It uses nature. It uses animals. Obviously, you have things like trees, plants,
Like the goats and the hare.
Right,
and
but trees
you're
don't actually talk to each other.
and you're giving them human qualities.
Yeah.
So I know I've had this discussion with people before. The Bible's not always literal. There were not literal trees talking in this section. It was a story. It was just this past Sunday, I told a fable, didn't I, in my sermon? Anybody remember that? Yeah, the Lion and the Mouse, Aesop's Fables. So he's using nature to illustrate a point. And
Amble like this brambles.
yeah, he's the bramble. He is,
And who's the vine?
boy, I don't even know who all the other ones were. It was just all the other good people that they didn't want to be the leader, and they just said we would rather somebody else be the leader over us.
Well, that would be like the cedar, the fig, and the olive.
Yeah, yeah,
The
they,
vine would be,
I put them as trees as well because it says that the trees say, what do you want us to stop doing our job and come sway over trees? You know, so I mean, the trees call the other things trees. So,
But the other one, the vine, it's like the grapes plant.
yeah.
That's
yeah, yeah.
Well, but the, like the elderberry starts out, I mean, it's not a vine. But
It's a
starts
bush.
as a bush
Yeah.
and it becomes a tree,
Boy,
you know.
if you put vine down, that's okay. I'm not going to dock you any points for that.
No, I mean,
Uh,
maybe it's
I-
saying that they're always looking for someone to be their king when,
Well, vines stretch, so maybe it's people that aren't even in the direct area. I don't know. That's just me reading into it without doing further search into that. But I did want to share this with you. There's in the Old Testament. This could be on your pop quiz next week. Probably not, because I won't remember. But how many fables are in the Old Testament? I'll give you the answer. There's only two. There's only two. Two fables in all the Old Testament. This one,
this one.
and then 2 Kings 14, verse 9. And that's a really short fable. So there's only,
14:9.
yep,
Thank you.
only two. So thinking about like fables have morals to the story, right? Aesop's fables have morals to the story. So sometimes people you don't just tell a story just for the sake of telling stories. You got to have a point to the story, right? So what would you say the moral of the story is here?
they accepted the bramble to be their king, they will be burned.
Yeah, they will be taken over.
Okay.
and choked.
Okay. So would there be like a moral to the story for us today? Not just for them? Could there be some lessons there about
Yeah,
leadership?
don't look for kings and people who shouldn't be kings.
All right, so be careful of who you pick as your leader, because you might, there's consequences, right? That's one thing that we see over and over and over again in the book of Judges. There are going to be consequences for your actions. And Abimelech was not the kind of man that had integrity. 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 Oh, hello over there at the young table. Yeah, integrity. He didn't have genuine qualities. You know, he was a manipulative type of man. Later on, we see the people weren't happy with his leadership. All right, so another moral of the story would be select your leaders wisely. Okay. Question number 7. Pa. What does this man say his father did, and how did they repay him?
I've got verses 17 and 18. Fought for him, and he killed his 70 sons.
All right.
That's all I can find.
Anybody got anything different?
Risked his life.
Yeah,
And delivered them out of the hand of Midian.
yeah. He fought for them. That's a good way to summarize it. He risked his life, right, for the people. He delivered them from the hand of the Midianite people, and then they repaid him.
By rising up against his father's house.
in his memory by revolting against him.
And
And
they
killing.
added in that his mother was just a servant of Gideon. It's not like, I mean, it was like,
So where does it say that again? Verse 18. His female servant. That again was not that was not a compliment to her. In fact, a lot of people said that was I don't even know the Hebrew words that was used there. They said it was very offensive. The way he called her this. It wasn't like she was just somebody's.
they're kind of like, he's got his wives and then there's concubines.
Yes,
You know,
and
so-
it was like a very derogatory term that he used there in regards to her. So here's a lesson about the people, and I know y'all are sick of me saying this, but people are people, and this is the way people are. I don't really want to call it human nature, but this is just the way people seem to be. They're very fickle. One day they loved Gideon, right? They followed him. They had all that deliverance from their enemies. And then after he's gone, there's another guy that swayed them to having him as a leader. Jotham is essentially saying here in this section, they deserved each other. The men of Shechem deserved Abimelech, and Abimelech deserved them. And it's not good either way, but they deserved one another. And there was going to be fire. He says there is going to be fire. There would be fire from Abimelech, and there would be fire from the people of Shechem. And Jotham, while he is not explicitly called a prophet, was this man a prophet? He was a prophet, because what he said, what he warned them in this section, it does come to pass later on. So question number 8. So he did, I will mention this, what he says there at the end of that statement that he's shouting down to them was a curse. It was a divine curse that this was going to happen. I see you. All right, you got the wheel spinning. Oh, mom. Like there's not any other moms in the room. But I know who she's talking about by her hand motion. Question number 8. After pronouncing a curse on Shechem, what did this young man do?
He ran for safety to Beer and became a fugitive.
All right. Verse 21. So he fled because, who did he fear? Oh, yeah, he feared his brother. If he feared his brother Abimelech.
Everybody he's shouting down to.
I'm sure he feared everybody there, but yeah, I mean, he saw he was probably fearful of what his brother was going to say in regards to him.
All your brothers murdered in front of you.
It'd be pretty horrific. Yeah. So he went to Beer. That sounds kind of strange. A city?
No, it's deep.
Yeah.
For the water.
For the water. It's a well. Literally, the word Beer is well. And obviously, it would be a place of abundant water. So where was it specifically? Don't know, because Beer was a popular name in Palestine at this time. So you would think he would have went to a place that was unknown, right? He's not going to go to a popular place. Otherwise, yeah, they would hunt them down and they would kill him. So, but would you say, oh, he was a scaredy cat, he was a wimp, he ran away, he should have stuck around? I mean, after all, he just made a prophecy. I mean, so it seemed like God was maybe giving him some sort of divine knowledge. Was he a wimp?
No, I think that God has plans for him, and he needs him safe.
So can you think of any other people that fled because of danger in the Bible?
David.
All right, so David would be one. Do you remember who he was? Yeah, he was hiding from Saul, right? Saul was chasing him down. Can you think of anybody else? There's a whole bunch of them in the Bible. When you start,
Well,
I was
there
like jotting them down,
there
and I was like,
times that Jesus not fled to hide, but there was times that he left to be private because things were getting stirred up. Like,
Wow.
it wasn't-
okay,
it
I didn't
wasn't
write that
the
one down,
right
but
time.
okay. Well, but to go along with Jesus, though, his mom and dad did.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, I was gonna say that, yeah.
Joseph and Mary.
Yeah, you remember where did they go to? Well, they went to Egypt. They went to Egypt because Herod was killing the infants, and you read about all about that in Matthew 2.
They
What?
were told to go a different way
Who?
because the wise men
The wise men?
that came
Yeah,
to see Jesus,
okay.
they were told to go the other way.
Okay. How about Jacob?
And Jonah.
Jacob. Jonah, I thought about putting him on the list. He was trying to hide just because he was grumpy with God. He didn't want to obey God. So Jacob fled because he was afraid of his brother, right? Genesis 27. Moses. Did Moses ever hide?
Yes.
Or Moses killed the Egyptian and he
He was
fled.
hidden, not long after he was born, too.
Yeah. So his parents. So Exodus 2 would be him running away and hiding. Elijah, the prophet, remember, he hid after he killed all the prophets of Baal, and then Jezebel was sent troops hunting for him. 1 Kings 19. How about the Apostle Paul?
Yeah, after he denied Christ, yeah.
Well, Paul.
Oh,
Paul.
yeah.
Paul. He was let down out of the city of Damascus
Yes.
in a basket.
That is-
And so I got a couple references here. So Acts 9, verse 23 through 25, and then 17, chapter 17, verse 10 through 14. All right. There's a lot of information going on here in this particular section, so we should probably move on. And I would say to end the chapter, but we're not going to end the chapter tonight. We're going to go through verse 25, and you'll probably notice that this is kind of, depending on the way your translation may be laid out, it looks like it's maybe halfway between a thought or something, but I kind of wanted to end on a cliffhanger, so that's why I stopped it where I did. So anyway, verse 22 says, After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbabel might be settled and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem who aided him in the killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way, and it was told Abimelech. To be continued. And we'll find out what more comes of that situation. So question number 9 goes to,
Why not?
I was going to quote her, but that would sound, all right, Rachel's mom. Question 9, what did God send?
A spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem.
All right, verse,
23.
okay. So did this happen immediately?
No, it was like 3 years into his reign.
All right, so 3 years after Abimelech is reigning over the people, he's ruling over them, and there's a one commentator describes this as Abimelech was more like a tyrant than a king.
Well,
Which we knew he was going to be, by the way.
Yeah.
He laid his way into it.
Yeah.
it says that they were also going to do the people that helped Abimelech, or whatever his name is. I didn't think that he did the killing. I thought the people he hired did.
6 of one, half a dozen of the other. If I pay somebody to kill somebody for me, then I may not have done it, but I hired, so by proxy they did it for me. You think of it this way: who killed Jesus?
The Jews.
Who technically killed Jesus? The Romans, but it was the Jews that turned him over. Yeah, they were. Yeah, so
Is behind this.
they, Abimelech was behind it. The men, they were all involved. They were.
They shared that crime.
Well, the way
Yeah,
it
they
says-
share the crime. Yep.
It says, who killed them, he's killed them, and on the men of Shechem who aided them.
Yeah. They were all conspiring together. Maybe Abimelech was the literal person that did all the beheading. You can ask somebody later on about that. We weren't there, but it does sound strange, maybe a little bit, that there was God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. We think of it this way: God gave permission for this evil spirit to come to them, and there's a lesson here that I think is really important. And the lesson is that Satan doesn't have control over the universe. Satan and his evilness, they have to get permission, right? They have limitations put upon them. Here's another example. How about Job? Remember Job, chapters 1 and 2? Could Satan just go out and harm Job?
No.
Freely?
I mean, he asked and he had limitations.
Yeah,
God allowed it.
Yeah, God allowed it. God permitted
He
it.
kept trying to stretch it and stretching it, but God still.
So this is part of the spirit world. Again, we're none of us living are a part of that. And if you got more questions about that, I know a guy who can help you out later on in the future. So, but you can take this for what it's worth. In one of the New Living Translation Study Note Bible, it says this was a mischief-making spirit. It seemed like it was making mischief amongst both parties, right? Stirring up. But that's kind of goes back to what Jotham said was going to happen. There was going to be fire coming from both parties. They were both going to be upset and not happy with one another. All right. Question number 10 goes to who's left? Raise your hand if you're left. Who? Chuck, are you the only one?
No, I'm Laura.
No. Marlene. So who gets it? Marlene. All right. Question 10. What did the men of Shechem set?
The men of the Shechem set men in ambush
All
against them.
All right, an ambush. Verse 25. So Abimelech's upset. The men of Shechem are upset. They set up this ambush. Now, some have thought that this ambush was a setup to kill Abimelech, while others think maybe this was just they're there observing Abimelech so that they can go relay information to other people. So
I figured it was like a Robin Hood situation. They're stealing all of the money that's coming to Abimelech.
and meanwhile,
and his goods are not coming in.
yeah, and meanwhile, they're robbing people while this is going on.
Now the message has been passed along that there's thieves on the road taking from the king.
And notice the very last part of that verse there, verse 25. And it was told Abimelech. So somebody was an informant.
Yep.
They were like, hey, they took all of our money. And he's like,
There is no honor among people like that.
He was a snitch.
yeah.
Now what happens to snitches? Anyway, yes.
Could be one of the people going along that have been robbed.
Yeah.
Well, if you read the rest of the story, we'll find out. So I was going to say, stay tuned next week for the rest of the story. So we have 2 people left, Chuck and Laura. One question, the bonus question, and who does it go to?
Laura.
All right. How many hands are in this section?
1, verse 17.
All right. Anybody get anything different?
Because I saw verse 16, 17, and 24. 3 times.
Oh, is that?
Verse 17, verse 24.
I don't see it on 16.
Yeah.
What version do you have?
Yeah. I
See it in 24.
What version of the Bible is this?
Who strengthened
Well-
his hands?
Well, I know Addison uses the ESV.
This says aided him in killing his brothers.
Missed that.
So it's not
Yeah.
the New King James. So what version do you have, Marlene?
16 and 17. Oh, which one? This is,
One of the Gideon Bibles.
yeah, I did it.
I don't
So is
see
it
it.
King James then?
Could be King James.
Yeah, it looks
They would
like it.
predominantly use King James.
Because Addison has it in 23.
Well, I hate to disappoint you all who missed it, but the bonus question comes directly from the New King James Version. So,
When did we say that?
I think I said it at the beginning.
Always said
Yeah.
3 or 4 books ago?
You can go back and watch the archive videos and the instant replay.
Let's go to the tape.
I don't remember where I said it, but it would be in one of those. I'm intrigued. I will have to look at the King James after the fact.
I'm looking at it now.
So, Addison,
I still don't see it.
you said
Addison,
that
you got what, 23?
she said
17 to 24.
24. So, would you mind just reading 24 for us? Since
That the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brother.
New King James says, who aided him. Interesting.
Yeah, King
Interesting.
James has aided him too.
All right.
Very cool.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Like I said, we'll learn the rest of the story and what happens to Abimelech. Just out of curiosity, it's okay if you haven't. But anybody in here, have you read the rest of the story? Read the account or
I've read it before, but not.
yeah, but not
I
recently.
wasn't leaving on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
What's gonna happen? I gotta remember the story.
Wait till you hear what happens to Abimelech.
Good stuff, good stuff.
Yeah.
Be bloody, I'm sure.
Good stuff.
Does it involve holy sticks?
No, it involves something a little bit bigger than that.
Same stone.
Guillotine?
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. So I think Dad's volunteered to close us with the word of prayer. So we will turn it over to him at this time.
I don't need it.
Real loud.
Father in heaven, we're so thankful again for this great meeting that we just went through. Father, we're thankful for the word that's been emphasized tonight and we studied. Thank you, Father, for us understanding. Father, go with all those who are not able to be with us this evening, especially Brother John Barker. Continue to bless him, Father, and watch over him. We trust and believe and have faith in you, Father, that you're going to heal his body and make him well again. Go with us now, Father, and go with all those who will be on the road traveling tomorrow and over the weekend. Bless all of us, Father, help us to be back in services again Sunday morning. All these many wonderful blessings we ask and pray. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you, everybody.